Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of the OutSystems webinars. My name is Ricardo Miguel Silva, and I have the pleasure of presenting by the playbook, the Agile Practice at OutSystems, which will be presented by the Engagement Guild Master, Nuno Fernandes. Passing the torch to you, Nuno.
Thank you, Ricardo. Well, so have a quick description of why this title. In fact, it's all about the document that we use, the guide that we use in-house, which is called the Project Delivery Playbook. Okay, I'm going to give the link for it at the end. So in all, if not most, if not all of the topics that we're going to discuss here today, can be found in this document. Okay. So let's start. What will we be discussing here today? So first, a quick ramble about why Agile, or why are we using Agile as basis for our methodology. Then we're going to take a look at the players, the team players, and finally we're going to concentrate on the OutSystems delivery practice, giving an overview of it, and highlighting the most relevant three phases: initiation, sprint development, and solution release. First of all, why are we having this webinar? Why are we having delivery practice as a topic here? In essence, this is another element that will be maximizing the OutSystems platform potential to solve this equation right here. So, keeping ISP delivering maximum value with quality. Sounds like a very complex equation indeed, even more when it's needed to keep this in a sustainable way during an entire project. So delivery practice is definitely a key element here that will bring the full potential of these layers right here, the platform, the development, the architecture, in order to really focus on this final goal, solving this equation. Okay. So why Agile? More and more technology is close to people. So all the technology advances really walked in that direction. We can even say that it will be very soon where technology will be literally under our skin. So in fact, what do we have? The user is the king. And users, they demand solutions fitting their needs. They do know what is best. And from a solution delivery perspective, more and more the users are deciding the go, no go. They have this decision. So Agile appeared to design, or was designed to hear key users during the development process. So iteratively, we're enhancing a solution, building on top of what was built in the previous iteration, and we are in that process being driven, in fact, by what is most valuable to the users. Even from a Darwinistic perspective, Agile principles seem to pave the right path. So, in essence, it's not only being responsive to change. In fact, Agile is indeed providing an answer to three fundamental goals of today's solution delivery: time to market, the ability to respond to change, and being driven by business value. So, taking a quick look at the core of it. Here's the Agile Manifesto from 2001. These principles are truly important to us. They convey a very constructive mindset. On top of that, the software craftsmanship of 2009 came to and further reinforce some aspects that were already present in the original principles, but really put them in a way that we actually we prefer to see it in this reinforced this way. At the end, we also found that we need to keep a more structured side above waterline. So we want to avoid fragile. In essence, Agile gives most value to the first sentence, but it doesn't mean that we do not value the second. And at each of these elements, let's try to understand why. So having a team interaction in alignment is truly important. Establishing a team that trusts each other, that works together, not only the development team, but also together with the customer. But in fact, we need to be closely following a well-structured process. Okay? That is key to solving the equation that we saw back there. The work is advancing based on written and clear user stories. So although we are indeed giving more value to well-crafted software over tons and mile-long documentation, our work is indeed progressing around written and clear user stories that are detailed together with the customer. Productive partnerships over contract negotiation. Yes, indeed. We want to establish a partnership with the customer, working as one. So again, reinforcing the community of professionals as well. But we cannot forget that it's also a commercial relation. There's a contract underneath, and we need to ensure alignment when change comes, and it always comes. Steadily adding value, so not only responding to change, but actually steadily adding value, and value is one of the key words here, of course. Steadily adding value over following the plan, yes, but there is always a high-level plan that is followed and is kept to keep us honest. And very important as well, when we get to a sprint, its scope is sacred. So as we're going to see later on, a sprint is in fact an agreement. The development team agrees to deliver the scope that was committed to, while the customer agrees on not changing requirements during the development process, during the sprint. So here's a comparison with Waterfall. While Waterfall is plan-driven, Agile is value-driven. So the same stages, but Waterfall is definitely giving more attention to the plan itself, while Agile, through iterations of these 5 stages, it's always being driven by value. Each iteration of Agile, let's also have a quick word about that. When we're talking about iteration, we're not talking about delivering piece by piece. We're saying that each sprint should also represent value to the customer. So, of course, we start small and very simple, but at the end of each sprint, it is important that the set of user stories that are delivered in that sprint do correspond to something that the users can use. It has a functional value to them. Okay. Notice also the remark here is that at the end we have come up with a product which is slightly different with perhaps what was imagined at start. But what Agile gives us is the assurance that that product is actually has a much higher probability of being closer to what makes the customer happy than simply by following a plan without any interaction with the customer in between. So, what is working in an Agile way? We start with the time box. The time box is defined from an original sizing. So it means that we have a high-level view of requirements and assumptions. We have a first vision of what are the features that are going to be needed, and we estimate all that. That gives us the size of the time box. Okay. In fact, the time box is represents a cost, represents resources, so the team involved, and that time box is agreed to be kept frozen until the end of the project. Okay. Other variables might change, but not the cost, not the time box. Then we proceed to prioritize the features. And the criteria, most important criteria, is indeed focusing first on business value. So trying to understand which features are indeed providing the most business value. Of course, we need also to consider the dependencies, eventual dependencies between features. And let's not forget that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So let's do the core first and details later. Okay. With this prioritization, we are able to fit the features in smaller time boxes, the sprints, right? And we are ready to start execution. During execution, and as Agile foresees, at the end of each iteration, we have a moment to demonstrate what was done to the users and collect feedback. So it is, of course, not only likely, but it happens 100% of the times we get feedback. And that feedback, of course, if it's minor changes, they can be well addressed in the next sprint. But new features is also possible to come. So that's why Agile exists, is to give the possibility that this value and these priorities can come early or during the development cycle. If these new features are not minor, they then are added to the backlog. Of course, we also do the same prioritization following the criteria already that did before. And in fact, according to that prioritization, the new features are added to the backlog. Okay? This might mean being put in front of existing features. And what happens is that, considering that the time box is frozen, we need to gain space for those new features, of course, which are highly valuable. It means that the less valuable features are moved to a next release. This, in fact, is perfectly aligned with a practice of seeking the release of a minimum viable product, an MVP, in the shortest time possible. So let's take a quick look at the team. Let's focus more on the OutSystems role right here: the engagement manager, delivery manager, and developers. In fact, this is the community of professionals that we were talking about when we were talking about the Agile principles. We'll not be focusing so much on these. We'll focus more on the OutSystems roles. Let's start with the engagement manager. He's in charge of project management and of functional analysis and design. So, in a nutshell, what are his drivers? He's steering the project. He's in fact the project team leader, and he's steering the project with the following drivers: the alignment of everything that is done against the business vision and goals, always challenging or making sure that everything that is being done is according to that vision and goals. Ensuring that the focus is always on what's the most valuable to business. So constantly ensuring that we are value driven. And associated to this topic, the terms being the customer and putting yourself in the user's shoes are very commonly referred to in this kind of interaction, not only by the engagement manager, but by the whole team, the whole OutSystems team. It's a very important mindset to be value-driven. And the engagement manager is the coach, or is someone that is indeed there to remind us of that. Also, the engagement manager acts as a communication hub. It doesn't mean that he's in the middle of all the communication between the team, the whole team, but in fact, he has a responsibility to put the right people in touch and not be a bottleneck beyond that point, ensuring that communication channels are all working as they should. Also very important, the engagement manager is someone who needs to be aware of the organizational context of the project. You need to understand not only the project boundaries, but also the stakeholders, their interest in the project, very specifically an attention to how the rollout or how the transition the new system, to the new application will be from the end users. So in fact, being worried that change management is addressed by the team. So he's not the sole responsible for the change management. He's definitely ensuring that this change management is indeed taking place and the proper transition is taken care of. In fact, at the end, he's the delivery process gatekeeper and coach. So if we want to make an analogy to Scrum, it would be he would be the Scrum Master, okay, or the closest to that role. The delivery manager is the architect. He's the leader of the developers, and he has the responsibility for the delivery of the technical solution, and as well as the orchestrating all the work and controlling the progress of the developers. He has a big focus on design and on quality assurance, and he's always seeking simple design, being pragmatic, and all this together helps us, of course, being the responsible for the delivery. Developers, they are focused on developing and testing the technical solution, following the best practices, and of course, on top of this marvelous OutSystems platform. So let's start with the describing more in having a good overview of our delivery practice. Let's start with just a disclaimer here. What we're going to see are guidelines and principles. They should not be interpreted like a rigid set of rules which are forced to a customer. In fact, no Agile practice is one size fits all, and at each customer you must see what works best and discuss what could be adapted. Of course, always keeping in mind that we cannot compromise the base principles that we're going to discuss here. So here's the framework, highlighting three main phases: the initiation, sprint development, and solution release. Initiation is where we identify the project vision, goals, personas, getting the business context, getting a high level of the business process. We gather all this in a document called Vision Document, which is kept live during the project and is key to guide it, so ensuring that we're always following business value and we understand the user, and in fact we are able to be the customer. And in this space is also where we align our delivery practice with the customer. So bringing back the topic that we just discussed about, there's no one size fits all. In the sprint development, we are iteratively delivering the scope of the current sprint. We are supporting the acceptance of the previous sprint and helping the customer preparing the next one. So these three activities right here are constantly running in parallel, and they happen once for each iteration. In the solution release, it's where we finalize the user acceptance step. Remember that acceptance starts already after a sprint is built, and the solution release is mostly used to finalize addressing all the feedback and completing all the tests and supporting the customer doing so. This is very important. This is where we are closing the rollout preparation, and this is not only referring to a deployment or technical deployment script. It has a lot to do with what we were discussing about ensuring change management, the transition from the as-is to the to-be, and that users at the end are taking, there is full adoption, and users are using the new application to its maximum potential. And it ends with the go live. And sometimes we also have a fourth phase of post-production. This is some time that may be reserved for monitoring the live app, for performance tuning, and for addressing minor changes or quick wins that are learned directly from user feedback in a production environment. So let's take a deeper look at the initiation, the first phase. So product vision. This is one of the first elements that we focus on. Usually, as I said, as we saw in the framework before, the initiation usually takes 1 to 2 weeks. This is one of the first topics addressed. Usually, this is something that the customer already has, so they have a very already concrete or reasonably concrete idea about the product vision. When this is not the case, in fact, OutSystems has a specific service called the project vision that does take place before a project, so even before the initiation, in order to help the customer reach this clear product vision. Not only that, but it's also important to give context to that product vision, understanding strategical and tactical goals of the company where this product will fit. Still in initiation, next step is identifying each persona. So persona is a user role, but more than user role, we give we try to understand this who is behind these user roles. So we are looking at its background. We are trying to understand through metrics and characteristics of the users who are these people. Okay? And very importantly, of course, we go through their user needs. And user needs are, in fact, this will be the source from where all the backlog will derive, all the project backlog. And of course, this is done while ensuring business goals that are to be met by this persona. Then we start analyzing each user need in particular. So what do we do for each user need? We start by modeling a business process that starts from that with that persona and just completely describing all the steps that are necessary to fulfill that user need from end to end. And here we are also involving in this business process other personas as well, and of course some of their needs usually appear here as well. And why do we start this way? This is a very good way to break the ice, to proceed with the discovery, and to get a much needed overview of how the business works, to understand the users, their actions, their goals, the steps that they need to go through. Also associated to each user need, we're going to draw a wireframe mockup, as you see an example right here. So we're doing this to understand and getting all the details about the user's journey. So there are a lot of details that are captured only with this visual support, and this is imperative to understand how users will be interacting with the app. Not only that, but it also provides a very first visual contact with the key users of what the application could be, and it's key to already to design very well what is crucial for the user to have in the app. Next to that, sometimes we also have high fidelity mockups being drawn. These are used not only to show very early how great the application will look like, and which, by the way, it does score high, motivating both team and users, right? So everyone likes a pretty application. But also look and feel or UI design might also be non-functional requirements. So in these situations, we usually also invite or bring along together with the team a UI design expert that will be focusing on the high fidelity mockups. Regarding the wireframe, sometimes when we're talking about more complex scenarios, we might also bring to the team a UX expert, a user experience expert together to the team. Okay, so directly from the user need, which is depicted here, we are deriving themes, and from these, from that theme, we'll design the epic structure. So that will contain at the end, and these are the final elements being designed during the initiation phase. We have the high-level stories, which later on during the sprint development will give origin to the final user stories. This is a very good way to organize user stories and a way to ensure that we can always trace back a user story back to its original user needs, and therefore we are quite well understanding the business value that we are focusing on. The epics are usually aggregators of user stories that are more closely related. At the end, here's an example of an initiation week. So we have a first alignment in the project kickoff. Then we start discussing the visions, the goals. Also, a very important element is very early we align on how the original time box was defined. So what was the original sizing based on what are initial requirements and assumptions. This is very important to establish a version 1 of the backlog, knowing in advance that backlog or that changes will come, and we need to trace or track those changes against the original backlog. Then we start looking at the business process, the epic structure, and usually around here we also prefer to take time to visit the user's workspace. It's also very important to really understand the customer, the user, and being able to put ourselves in their shoes. Usually, we also take time to align on delivery practice and align the working model. And then we start preparing the sprint 1, and we're going to see more about sprint preparing right after. Still in this week, we are presenting, as we saw earlier, the first mockups. So let's go for the core of it, the iterative section, the phase of our practice, delivery practice, the sprint development. We can describe it very easily, or in a high level, knowing that with the cycle right here. In fact, the sprint focuses on delivering a set of priority user stories, as already mentioned, and these are all the activities and steps that are taken around those user stories. We start by writing the backlog together with the customer. In fact, it's usually the business analyst or the customer that together with the key users have a big deal of work here, while the engagement manager is more validating and being a coach to this backlog, but we'll be discussing this in a minute next. We follow by the grooming, which in fact means tuning the user stories that were written here, validating with the team and estimating it, until we get to this milestone right here, the definition of the checklist that will indicate when a user story is ready to become a candidate to be included in a sprint. And that selection, and from the set of user stories that are indeed ready, we are going to select, in fact, which ones are going to be addressed in the sprint itself. As we said before, the sprint is in agreement. Here is committing to deliver, and the customer is committing not to change requirements while this is being delivered during the sprint execution itself. The sprint execution is depicted here on this step, and we also recommend having, before the business demo, being able to react to feedback on an internal demo first, and only then, once we also come to this milestone definition of done, are we ready to present the demo to the business. Okay. After the sprint is done and the sprint ends with the business demo, the user acceptance tests start. So, in fact, this is depicting, or these steps depict these three activities that we already saw in the original slide about the framework. These first steps are the shaping, these are the build, and user acceptance is the third. A bit more detail about the writing backlog. We start with the three-liner, so which is commonly known as a user role ICANN activity. So that benefit, it's very useful to in a very simple way to establish goal and business value of user story, okay, and business value. And user stories must follow the INVEST principles. We're not going to go deep in what these are, but in fact, these are all about a user story needs to be valuable, testable, as granular as possible, small as possible, estimable. These are very important principles to recognize a good user story. The mock-up and activity flow, so the business process. So we already saw examples of that earlier. This should not be seen as for each user story we have a mock-up and activity flow. In fact, what happens is that with those that were built during initiation phase, this user story must be clearly depicted there. We need to understand where it's taking place. Finally, the acceptance criteria is where we have all the detail about the user story. All the steps, all the user journey, step by step, is described here to the maximum detail as possible using business language. All these acceptance criteria, these are bullets, so we write all of this through bullets, making sure that all these are testable and verifiable. And it's in this process where grooming will later also focus. So grooming, once again, is all about validating, it's all about tuning, and very often unveiling hidden assumptions that could be not explicitly. And this is where the exercise that we take to make them explicit. And all this is key for having an accurate effort estimation of each user story, which is, of course, crucial for expectations management, to check the impact of user story that is now being estimated against what was originally sized in the original time box. This is a very important step right here, and all about the details of the acceptance criteria. Finally, it's also very useful that when possible, as much as possible, that we have the customer provides examples and seed data, and we're going to use the seed data not only later on tests, but even during the development process. It's very useful to ensure a good focus and understanding on what the user will really see and having a good user experience. Here's an example of the two milestones that we mentioned before, the definition of the transition between the shaping and the building phase, and the done is to ensure that everything is ready for the business demo. Usually the engagement manager has the role of being a gatekeeper, so not ensuring these two milestones. So here's a timeline, an overview of the most important activities taking place related to a sprint. You can see here depicted the 6 steps that we saw in that user story cycle, some slides before. These are clearly depicted here. So you can also notice that these activities span through 3 different sprints. So the preparation, the shaping actually take place before the sprint starts. The sprint itself is all about the implementation and testing phase, and having that first feedback and stabilizing what was developed, and ends with the business demo. Let me also, and the acceptance takes place after the sprint itself, of course. Let me also highlight the goals that we want to reach with this internal demo right here. That signals the starting of this stabilization period. So this is where we get the first feedback. We are not addressing new developments right here. We are highlighting on high priority defects and or quick wins and ensure the demo script. And in fact, one important thing that we're doing here is preparing the business analyst for himself to provide the business demo. So normally the engagement manager has that responsibility, but of presenting the demo. But we recommend that is done in fact being with the help of the business analyst, when not even business analyst being in the lead. Why is this? Usually because, or mostly because it gives a very to the business, to the users, of ownership. So after 2 weeks of a sprint, themselves, the customer themselves, they're already owning and presenting the solution to each other. So this is a very important message right here. Finally, after the business demo, which should follow a very close, or should have a demo script to be followed, and it should be done in a storytelling way. So always in the position of the user and describing what he wants to do in his journey, and not merely showing screens and functionality. It needs to be compelling and focus on the storytelling. And after the business demo, then we start the user acceptance tests. It's very important that for these tests, these are also done in a structured way or a scheduled way. We recommend scheduling with the key users or testers specific slots with a reasonable duration, where they will be able to focus on their testing, and of course that way ensuring that they can flee from their day-to-day obligations in operations and can focus on UAT. Also very important to depict, although it's not depicted usually, right after the end of a sprint, we also take the time to do a sprint retrospective. This is also key to ensure that the team as a whole is discussing what went wrong, what went well during the sprint. So it's a team self-improvement mechanism that is highly recommended to take place, not only between the development team or itself, but also extending to the customer. Why not? Okay, the team is one, and it learns how to work best together, and that's a very key point. Now let's have a different perspective of these same activities that we have right here. Let's have a different perspective of it. So what we have now is they're the same activities that we saw in the slide before, but they are seen now in the day-to-day timeline perspective. So in fact, we can see here that these three tracks, the shape, build, and accept, are taking place in parallel, right? And at the end, this results in a pretty demanding schedule, as you can see. Everyone's pretty busy. And in fact, one good analogy here to show how much orchestration and structure is needed here, one good analogy could be an assembly line. So all this team is working on the assembly line of this sprint, okay? And they must all work very closely together and very well aligned to ensure the sprint delivery. So as an assembly line, if something goes wrong at any of the stages, the output will suffer. Okay? So this element right here is one of the most important messages to align with the customer very early on in the process, to ensure everyone's committal and motivation to work together towards solving that equation that we saw in the principle. So keeping high speed, delivering maximum value with quality. Okay? This is the core of the or this relation, this close alignment is the core to answer that equation. So finally, after the last sprint, we start the solution release, where of course we are doing the acceptance of that last sprint, but also finalizing all the testing and supporting all the feedback and addressing defects, minor changes, and ensuring all the necessary end-to-end testing takes place here. And last but not least, we are making sure that we have a solid and complete, very complete rollout plan that is not only looking at the technical side of the release, but also the functional, the operational, knowing exactly how each user, each persona will be affected with the new system, how the transition will take place. So they were working on a Friday in some way, on a Monday they will be working on a different way. How will this take place? This all needs to be very well understood and clear out in the rollout plan. And then we have the go live, and that's it. Let me just highlight that all this is in this document right here that will be providing the link, the project delivery playbook. And thank you very much.